Welcome to the Damn Strong podcast. I'm your host, Bree, and I'm a full-time online fitness coach, and my passion is to educate women on all things fitness. I help women just like you step into the power of knowledge and commitment to ultimately live your best and strongest life. In this podcast, we'll talk about being damn strong in our body, mind, and life. I'll be teaching you how to navigate nutrition, strength training, and mindset challenges. So get ready to take some notes because we're building a damn strong life. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Bree, and this is the Damn Strong podcast. And if you're watching the video right now, my background looks a little different. Had a last minute little dog watching thing come up for a friend. So I wasn't able to record this ahead of time. So I'd be at home with my podcast mic and all that. And so my options were to either not have an episode this week or have the episode go up pretty late this week. And I was like, you know what? I can just film in her guest bedroom and sit on the floor. Like there's plenty of carpet, which is good for, the acoustics and the sound. And so what if the background looks different? I am sitting up against the bed because I need some back support because I'm sitting on the floor to be in front of a window so that we have at least some good lighting with the change of scenery. So I figured you guys wouldn't mind, but I just wanted to explain that because you'd be like, okay, wait a second. Why are you sitting in a bedroom on the floor in front of a window? Like what's going on? That's why. So anyways, let's go ahead and get into this actually part 3 of debunking. So I've been doing a series of debunking fitness myths. If you haven't been following along, make sure to check out parts 1 and 2 as well. But we are moving on to part 3. This part, I only have 4 myths to go over. In the previous episodes, I think I normally strive for 5, but what I've just kind of been doing is as I'm scrolling on social media, when I see things pop up, I just kind of write them down. And so as I've kind of been building up to this part 3, I've only have 4 written down, but I don't, necessarily have to do 5. So just want to let you guys know, I'm going to be going over 4 myths today. And I say, we just go ahead and jump into it. So the first myth that I see is when, you're scrolling on social media and you see a girl with let's just talk about lower body. Cause I feel like this can pertain to any muscle, but you see this most common with glutes. But you'll be scrolling on social media and you'll see a girl post saying, I did this one exercise and it changed everything about my glutes. Or I did this one exercise to lift my glutes. Or I did this one exercise, my glutes finally started to grow. That's a myth. There is not one exercise that's going to all of a sudden change glute growth. If you're doing everything well, right? You're eating at maintenance or maybe a surplus, you're eating a good amount of protein, you're working close to failure. There is not just one exercise that you can add in that's all of a sudden going to transform everything. So typically what happens if you are someone you're like, Brie, no, really, I started adding hip thrusts in and my glutes started to grow. It was crazy. It's not necessarily the hip thrust that did it for you. This is typically what's going to happen. So the first thing that will happen is because you're actually enjoying the exercise, and let's just go with hip thrust here, you're probably now actually pushing yourself close to failure. If you're new here and you haven't been listening for a while, the one requirement of building muscle is that you have to be getting close to failure. I don't care if you're doing all the right exercises. I don't care if you have the perfect form. If you are not getting close to failure, you will not build muscle. Because if you think about it, exercise, all it is adaptation. That's it. When you run 3 miles and you run 4 and you run 5, you're pushing yourself a little bit harder so your body adapts. When you lift weights, you have to lift heavy enough to tell your body, hey, we have to adapt. We have to lift up this weight. We need to adapt. And so your body responds by adapting, aka building muscle. And so you have to be pushing yourself hard enough to failure. So if you weren't seeing any muscle growth and then you started doing, I'm doing quotations, started doing this one exercise, and all of a sudden you're seeing muscle growth, probably what actually happened, one of the things that could have actually happened is that you're now actually pushing yourself close to failure because you enjoy it. Here's the thing about hip thrusts and any exercises that work, the lower body or the glutes in the shortened position, you really, really, really feel it and you get a great mind muscle connection. The reason is because the hardest part of the exercise is when you're squeezing. I've explained this in other episodes, so I apologize for repeating this for some of you guys who already know this, but when you're in a squat, the hardest part of the exercise is when you're all the way down and your glutes are fully stretched out around your pelvis. But the hardest part of a hip thrust is when you're contracted and your glutes are squeezing really hard at the top. And so that's why people will be like, oh my gosh, hip thrust changed my life is because probably what actually happened is just an exercise. You can get a really, really, really good mind muscle connection. And so you're actually pushing yourself close to failure. And so if an influencer is experiencing that, we're like, oh my gosh, like this actually transformed my glutes. That could be it. Is previously they weren't pushing themselves that close to failure. And this exercise allowed them to do that. Another reason why an exercise could be contributing to your glute growth, or just, again, this could apply to any muscle, is maybe you actually enjoy your workouts now and now you're consistent. It could be that, again, with lower body, you were just super inconsistent. You didn't enjoy any of the exercises. You didn't enjoy any of the workouts. And so you kind of hit lower body here or there. But now that you've got hip thrust in your program, you're not missing a leg day because you finally feel it now in your glutes. Like you can feel the growth, you feel the mind muscle connection so much. And so now you're being consistent. So that could be another reason why, if you feel like you're adding in this one exercise and it's transforming your glutes, it's probably because you're now pushing yourself hard enough and possibly increase your consistency. Another reason that probably an influencer or even yourself, again, why you might believe that this one exercise did it for you is that it's more so of an emotional reaction. You just feel like this is the one that's doing it for you. Again, it kind of goes back to the, length, working your muscle in the lengthened position versus the shortened position. If you were to look back at all the exercises that you do, if you do squats, if you do RDLs, if you do lunges and you do hip thrust, which exercise do you feel it the most is probably the one that you're going to pick. And so it's kind of an emotional thing of like, man, I started adding hip thrusts and like, I swear that's what did it for me because I just feel it when I'm doing them. Sensation doesn't necessarily equal muscle growth, right? You don't feel it a ton when you're doing RDLs. You don't feel it a ton in your glutes when you're doing squats. You don't feel it a ton when you're doing walking lunges, but you are working out the glute muscles, right? It's stretched the glutes when, again, the hardest part of a walking lunge, a squat, is at the bottom of the exercise when the glutes are fully stretched around your pelvis versus in a hip thrust. When your glutes are fully stretched, it's down at the bottom when the pleats are sitting on the floor, right? When you come up to the top of a hip thrust and the glutes have to contract and squeeze together. That's why like a bicep curl, right? When you squeeze your biceps together, you feel it a lot. The last reason that, an influencer may be coming on and saying like, oh, this one exercise did it for me is that it's just catchy. It's going to get you to watch the video. It's going to get you to follow what they're doing. Like, oh my gosh, if her glutes look like that, and that's the one thing that changed it for her, it's probably going to do the same for me. You just buy into that myth. And so I really think most influencers are doing it for the catchiness, the clickbait of it. It could be that exercise they found is really, really hard, right? It might not be like, hey, this one exercise, or it might be like this one superset did it for me, or this one change I made to this exercise exploded my glutes, right? It's catchier that way. You're more likely going to do and follow what they're saying if it's only one thing. This is the thing about humans. It's like, we want things to be less complicated, right? If you knew you could take one pill and reach all your fitness goals, you would probably take the easier route, right? Like that's just us as human nature. So if you know that there's this one exercise, all you have to do is add this one exercise into your routine and your glutes are going to explode. That sounds a lot sexier than like, hey, you probably need to do like 3 to 4 exercises, 2 times a week, working really hard for 45 minutes, probably to an hour, eat food, eat your protein. Like that's not sexy, like the foundations and the basic of what it takes to build muscle, unfortunately, is like not sexy for a lot of people. And so I think having this one exercise change everything for me sounds sexier. But then I also think there are generally probably people who don't realize this. There are people who are probably posting online who don't understand that, like, okay, it was that they finally pushed themselves hard enough. They finally actually got consistency and they just don't realize it actually wasn't the one exercise. And they're spreading a little bit of misinformation here, but they don't realize that they're doing that. Okay, these next two actually come from a reel that I recently posted. So I posted a reel talking about how, coaches will say that if you're not losing weight, it's because you're not eating enough. And when I say eating enough, I'm talking about calories. Yes, some people pointed out that like you can physically eat more food. Like a pound of carrots is going to have less calories than a pound of Snickers, obviously, right? And so, pound to pound is the same amount, right? So let's just say like a pound and a half of carrots, it's probably going to have less calories than a pound of Snickers. And a pound and a half of carrots is more food physically, but it's going to be less calories. I get the whole volume thing. But when I see coaches will post on their Instagram saying, oh, the reason why you're not losing weight is because you're not eating enough is just simply untrue. And that's not even the myth that I'm diving into, but I just want to put this basis out there of like, you can't undereat your way to gaining weight or not losing weight at all. And this is like totally a morbid way to go, but it really proves a point. Like, if that was the case, there wouldn't be people starving all around the world. There wouldn't be people that walked out of concentration camps skin and bone. Like, there's a reason when you don't get food, you lose weight because your body has to pull energy from somewhere. And I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So we're disclosing that first. So something that a lot of people brought up in the comments of my reel was, oh, if your hormones are out of balance, like you can't lose weight. That is a myth. That is completely untrue. Now, I will put a little asterisk in there, like something like Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism. That can make it much, 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 much more difficult. Okay. And we'll talk about that. But I guess a better way to put this myth is that even if you're in a deficit, if your hormones are whacked out, you can't lose weight, which is completely incorrect. If you are in a deficit, you will lose weight. Now, again, going back to the Hashimoto's and hypothyroidism, are those two things that are hormone based that can affect your BMR and your metabolism and lower it so that we have to be even more of a deficit to lose weight? Absolutely. And would that make it incredibly difficult to lose weight? Absolutely. But it does not take away from the law of thermodynamics, right? That's like saying, if you were trying to save money, right? Like, at the basis of it, if you need to save money, you need to make sure that you are spending less than you're earning, no matter what. Nothing about that changes. And it's like if someone said, well, if you spend with a credit card, then you can't save money. And it's like, no, that's not true. You can have a credit card and still save money. Can it make it more difficult to save money when you have a credit card because you have a credit limit and you could end up putting yourself to debt? Absolutely. Like, you're probably going to be able to save money a little bit easier if you're always spending cash, right? But it doesn't take away from the fact that in order to save money, you have to spend less than you earn. That is the basis of saving money, and the basis of fat loss, losing weight, is you have to be expending more than you are intaking. So being more active or putting out more energy, that's even being active, you being alive burns calories, right? Then you are consuming of energy, which is food. So all that being said, everyone loves to bring up cortisol. Even if your cortisol is super, super, super high, if you are in a calorie deficit, you will lose body fat. Okay. Again, if cortisol was the thing that was blocking people from losing fat, what do you think people in concentration camps were? They didn't have low cortisol, right? People who are starving across the world, they don't have low cortisol. The mom who's going through a divorce who drops a ton of weight, she ain't got low cortisol, right? That would make it, especially in today's society with how like stressed out I feel like a lot of us get, it would make it literally impossible. That'd mean anytime anything stressful came up, there would be no weight loss. So if you are not losing body fat, it means you are not in a deficit. Okay. It means you are not expending more energy than you are consuming. All right. And like I said at the beginning of this part, there are things that can affect that and make that more difficult. If you have high cortisol, can it make it more difficult to lose weight? Yes, it can. You know how? When you are more stressed out, you're more likely to not go get your workouts in, not go for a walk. You're going to have higher hunger cues when you're stressed out. Your sleep's going to be shit. Like, all of those things affect fat loss indirectly, not directly, indirectly, right? If you sleep terrible, the last thing you want to do in the morning is get your workout in and then go for your walk and then make sure you're hitting your calories and your protein, right? Sleep is a great example of like a domino effect. Like, you don't get good sleep, it's really hard to push through the rest of the day and do the things that you really, really want to do for your goals. Ghrelin is another hormone that people don't talk about. Ghrelin is your hunger hormone. When you are hungry, ghrelin shoots up. That's how you feel hunger. Ghrelin shoots up, you feel hungry, you eat. Ghrelin goes down, leptin goes up. Leptin's your fullness hormone. And so if ghrelin's really high all the time, AKA meaning if you're starving all the time or hungry all the time, it's going to make it really, really, really hard to stick into a deficit. However, if you're experiencing hunger, it doesn't mean that you can't lose body fat. It just means one of your hormones is kicking in saying, hey, we're hungry, let's eat. You eat, ghrelin goes down, leptin goes up. But if ghrelin's up all the time, you're basically me just saying, if you're constantly hungry, it's hard to stay in a deficit. So yes, hormones primarily affect things around fat loss indirectly, but there are things like Hashimoto's, hypothyroidism. Oh my gosh, it's gonna be the death of me pronouncing that can affect your overall energy output And therefore, because your energy output is lower, you have to have even lower deficit calories, and it becomes very difficult. So if you have Hashimoto's, you have hypothyroidism, go speak with your doctor and get those in check. I've worked with people with Hashimoto's. I've worked with people with hypothyroidism. I know it feels like it can be impossible, but hormones are more so for most people out there are something that's indirectly affecting your fat loss and not directly affecting it. Okay, next one comes from the wonderful comment section that is my most recent reel. Eating below your BMR will halt fat loss. That is completely a myth. So let's first talk about what your BMR is. BMR stands for basal metabolic rate. That is basically just a fancy word for how many calories that you would burn if you laid on the bed all day and you didn't move, you just blinked and breathed and swallowed your spit. Like, that's it. That's how much energy your body expends is your BMR. So your basal metabolic rate is what your body energy-wise needs, or what your body energy-wise produces, just you simply staying alive. And so you're like, okay, well, if I consume less than my BMR, like, I'm going to control alt delete, right? I'm not going to say the word DIE on here because I don't want to get canceled. So we're saying control alt delete. Okay. So you're like, when I control alt delete, because if I need this much energy in order to be alive, if I don't get that, like, that's really bad, right? Okay, listen, your body is an incredible thing. There's this thing called fat that's on your body. Fat is stored energy. So what your body does is if it doesn't have enough energy for the functions it's going about during the day, it pulls from the fat storage. And this is the problem when people are like, well, if you eat too little, your body will just stop losing fat. If that actually happened, you would control alt delete, because your body has to pull energy from somewhere. So if you were laying on a bed, okay, and you didn't eat all day, you didn't get one thing of food in all day, your body's going to go to your fat reserves and say, hey, you know what? We're not getting any energy from food today. So we're going to go to our reserves, AKA fat storage, and we're going to pull from there all day so we can keep and stay alive. So this is what people aren't understanding when they say like, oh, if you undereat or if you eat at your BMR or whatever, you're going to halt fat loss. Your body goes into this quote unquote starvation mode, which is also a myth. And I don't know if I've talked about that one yet on my podcast, but starvation mode is where, you know, people believe that if you are not eating enough food, your body shuts down and just stops burning fat. Again, you would control alt delete if your body didn't have another energy source to go to. Now, it can go to muscle, but that's where strength training comes in really, really handy. And obviously, you guys are not all potatoing on a bed your entire life. You are moving and active and moving around. That's why strength training is so important for fat loss and not just weight loss. If you're strength training and you're telling your body, hey, like, we need this muscle. That's what strength training does when you're in a deficit. It can build muscle, but it also tells your body, hey, we need this stuff. This stuff is precious to us because we keep doing this 4 or 5 times a week. You can't use this for your energy source because we need this. And we actually have to keep adapting because she keeps doing this thing where she goes heavier and heavier and heavier. So your body's like, okay, we'll keep the muscle and we'll pull from the fat. And so again, if your body had nowhere to go, control alt delete. Your body has to have an energy source. And so it doesn't make sense when people talk about the stereo starvation mode because there's no other energy source for your body to go to. But that's how fat storage works, right? So if you consume more calories than your body needs, your body's like, hey, we got all our energy through food sources today. This is kind of cool. Let me, you know what? We're going to take this extra energy that we didn't use and we're going to stick it right there. That's how fat storage works. Okay. So I'm not saying eat below your BMR. I'm not promoting it. I'm not saying that's going to be great, but people came for me in the comments saying, oh, well, if you eat below your BMR, which is what your body just needs at a basic level to literally be alive, you're going to halt fat loss, which that's just not true. If you don't have enough energy for your body to perform the basic functions, then it goes to your fat storage. And again, I know I keep talking about it, it's a little bit morbid, but that's how people control alt delete. When they don't eat enough, when there's starvation around the world, is there's no fat storage or even muscle storage left for them to go to. That's why they're skin and bones, because there's no energy left. And now we can talk about malnutrition as well. Obviously, like, you also need certain nutrition as well in order to stay alive. But that's why there are people who are alive who are skin and bone. Okay, we're going to get a little bit off of this like fat loss, calorie deficit train. I just need to get that off my chest because The real people, I mean, a lot of you guys got it, especially like people that I've seen that I see comment all the time. People I know, I'm like, hey, I see you in my comments. I know you know what I'm talking about, but it's really hard for people to grasp that this idea of a calorie deficit and all that. And I understand. I understand because people have tried to be, and I'm doing quotations, tried to be in a calorie deficit, hasn't worked for them. And usually that comes down just to a human error. And when I say it comes down to a human error, that's taking responsibility, right? If you are trying to be in a calorie deficit through tracking could be improper. Maybe you're not tracking on the weekends. There's lots of podcasts where I've talked about, if you don't feel like you're in a calorie deficit, these little things can be popping up. And I have people who DM me who'll be like, hey, I'm in a calorie deficit. I'm not losing weight. I'm like, what are your calories at? And they'll tell me, and I'm like, okay, and your step goal, you have step goal set up. They're like, yep. And I'm like, okay, are you tracking on the weekends? They're like, well, no. And it's like, okay, well, you can't say. It's just like, again, if you're trying to save money, and you track your finances, but you don't track it on the weekend. And on the weekend, you're going to the fancy steakhouse and to the club and getting bottle service, or maybe you're getting maybe that's not your life right now. You're getting a brand new $300 stroller for your child. Like, if you're not tracking those expenses, it's going to be hard for you to be saving money. So anyways, I'll hop off this train of calorie deficit, but hopefully all that made sense for you guys. Okay. So this last one, I don't know if I'd necessarily classify it as a myth. I think it's kind of it's a way to gain perspective on something that a lot of people say that kind of makes what you're saying a myth. And so what I'm getting at here is a lot of people will say, I'm an all or nothing person. You saying that you're an all or nothing person is kind of a myth. And I'll dive into why. So I saw a Instagram post and someone was like, you're not an all or nothing person. You're just really good at quitting when it gets hard. And I was like, ooh, that is a mic drop, right? Because it's so easy to do the things we need to do when it's easy. Right? People come to me and say they're an all or nothing person. It's not that I don't believe them. It's that I think in our mind, we're trying to place blame. Man, that's about the right word, because I don't want any clients who are my all or nothing clients who have come to me hearing this and like me knocking them at all. But like, I think it's us taking this blame and saying, hey, it's a characteristic trait of me that I don't really have control of. Like, this is just how I am, kind of thing. And I don't think everyone who comes to me believes that, but I do think a lot of people, maybe even you listening right now, you're like, yeah, I've really identified myself as an all or nothing person. And you've really sat in that identification. And because you call yourself an all or nothing person, you continue to be an all or nothing person. And I think if we relabel it and just say, no, I'm not an all or nothing person. I'm just really good at quitting when it gets hard. Woof. That's like a real kind of like reality check of like, oh my gosh, the next time you're trying to do something and follow through with goals and you're like, oh, I don't want to go work out. It's like, yeah, you are, you're good at quitting when it gets hard. You're like, damn it. I'm not an all or nothing person. When things aren't easy like I want them to be, I quit. And that's what I need to change about myself. I need to see like, hey, I'm not going to be good at quitting when things get hard. I'm going to be really, really good at following through when things are hard and problem solving when things are hard. Gosh, I've talked about before in the podcast, and I'm going to talk about it again. If you can become a problem solver type of personality, your world opens up. When I say problem solver, that kind of ties in with also planning as well. Like, if you keep noticing this routine of like, every time you get home from work, and you don't want to go to the gym. You don't want to go to the gym. You get home from work, you sit on the couch. I don't want to go. You get home from work, you sit on the couch. You don't want to go, right? Because it's hard to get back up. So then you have the problem solver mindset. And you're like, you know what? The problem is that I get home from work. I need to stop going home first. And I need to go straight to the gym from work. And that could potentially solve your problem. But again, it's not that necessarily you being an all or nothing person is a myth. And I actually, before I kind of wrap this up, it actually could be a myth for you, right? You don't do this with work, right? Like, when you don't feel like going to work, you're not just like, well, I either go to work or I don't. I'm an all or nothing person. Like, no, you don't not pick up your kid from school and sometimes pick up your kid from school because you're an all or nothing person. You don't sometimes brush your teeth and then sometimes you do brush your teeth because you're an all or nothing person. Like, there's so many examples in your life where you get stuff done no matter if you feel like it or if it's more difficult, but you figure out how to do it, right? If you need to pick up your kid after school today, but like there's some conflict stuff with work, you either, reach out to your spouse or maybe reach out to your parents or someone like that to go and help pick up your kid. Like, you figure out a solution to it instead of being like, well, not going to pick up my kid today. Like they're just going to have to spend the night at school because I just don't feel like doing it. Like there's just a lot of other areas in your life that you're not an all or nothing person. It's just really easy for us to be all or nothing in our fitness because the all or nothing is go to the gym or don't go to the gym. Well, it's really easy not go to the gym, or track calories, don't track calories. It's really, really easy to not track them, or meal prep, not meal prep. All of these things, these nothing things, these inactions that you're taking don't necessarily affect someone else. So it's easier for us to quit when the going gets tough on ourselves versus when it relies on other people. And, even your job, that might be something that's more, again, if you have a family that does rely on you, but if you're just like a single person and you realize you can't just be all or nothing with your job, you have to show up to work. Yes. Do you have sick days? 100%. Are there days that you're not sick and you call into work sick? 100%. But I guarantee you're not doing that every single other day, right? So yeah, you calling yourself an all or nothing person could be a myth. And it might be a myth for most people, right? People who all are all or nothing, or you're seeing yourself that way. I want you to start rephrasing it because so that way it calls you out on your shit a little bit. You know what I mean? Of, hey, I'm not all or nothing. I'm just really good at quitting when it gets hard. And we're going to change that narrative for you. We're going to be like, hey, you know what? I'm really good at problem solving or pushing through or finding a solution when things get hard. I'm really good at giving my best. And I said your best. I didn't say perfection. Okay. I said your best. And sometimes your best is showing up at 70%. But guess what? You still showed up. You still gave 100% of 70%. Right. All right, guys, we're going to end this episode with that little pep talk. So as always, if you found anything helpful in this episode, please, please, please DM me. I literally had someone DM me last week. She was like, hey, you asked for feedback. You asked to know like if things are helpful. Here's my feedback. And it was super, super helpful. And I loved it. So if you had any feedback, anything you want to share with me, any things you want to add to the debunking episodes, please shoot me a DM. As always, if you want to support the show in a free way, screenshotting and sharing to your stories and tagging me always helps. I can reshare your stories. We can get the word out about the Damn Strong podcast. As always, I hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Damn Strong podcast. Show me some love by leaving a review and sharing a screenshot of this episode on your Instagram stories. Until next time, stay strong.